Are US senators finally ready to hit Russia where it hurts? And do they have the backing to make it count? Is the oil market being weaponized to sink the Kremlin's war economy? And how close is Iran to crossing the nuclear threshold? Days, maybe hours? Let's break it all down and put you in focus on these hot events. This is UATV. Be sure to follow us on YouTube and socials to stay ahead of the curve and stay informed on the world's most pressing stories. Imagine this: 82 out of 100 US senators backing a bill that could tank Russia's economy overnight. And this isn't just talk. Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal just visited Kyiv, where they met with President Zelensky to discuss ramping up pressure on Moscow. Zelensky threw his full support behind their new sanctions bill, one aimed at hitting Russia's energy and banking sectors hard, slashing the oil price cap to $30 and cracking down on companies helping the Kremlin dodge restrictions. Add to that calls from French and German leaders to seize frozen Russian assets, and you've got sanctions wave with real teeth. But can this unified front actually shift momentum on the battlefield? Let's see.
Europe and the United States may impose new joint sanctions against Russia in the near future, French finance and foreign affairs ministers stated during a meeting with U.S. senators. According to Le Monde, Republican Lindsey Graham and Democrat Richard Blumenthal arrived in France immediately after a visit to Kyiv. They announced that the U.S. Senate is ready to consider a bill on new restrictions against the Russian Federation and assured bipartisan support for the legislative initiative.
I am going to urge our European allies to lower the price cap to make life harder for Putin's fossil fuel-based economy, increase OPEC production, and lower the price ceiling. If Europe does this, it will matter. It will harm Russia's war machine. Lindsey Graham, chair of the Senate Budget Committee.
Graham and Blumenthal stated that the U.S. Congress and European governments have only 2 weeks to make a decision. They urged support for a bill on large-scale sanctions to cut off Moscow's critical revenue source fueling its war machine. This is a real chance to stop the aggressor country, the bill's initiators believe. The legislation includes, among other things, 500% tariffs for states that continue to import Russian oil, gas, uranium, and other goods. The bill has already been supported by 82 out of 100 senators.
As we told President Zelensky, there is strong bipartisan support because Americans see not only Putin's insult to America, but also our national security interests. Putin will keep going if he's not stopped in Ukraine, and then we'll have to deploy troops due to our treaty obligations. Richard Blumenthal, United States Senator from Connecticut.
Torsten Frey, chief of staff to the German federal chancellor, believes it is necessary to revisit the issue of confiscating Russian assets, given Russia's refusal to end its war against Ukraine. Earlier, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that he supports the confiscation of frozen Russian funds, but only if there is a legal pathway. According to the chancellor's chief of staff, this is a matter of justice, given, quote, the enormous losses and human suffering Russia is causing Ukraine.
We are now experiencing the heaviest bombardments since the start of the war. Therefore, it is fair that Russian money be used for necessary defense measures. Torsten Frey, chief of staff to the federal chancellor of Germany, in an interview with Frankfurter Allgemeine Sonntagszeitung.
To combat Russia's shadow fleet, which Moscow uses to transport energy resources and stolen Ukrainian grain in circumvention of sanctions, Sweden announced enhanced oversight of foreign vessels. According to a new regulation effective July 1, 2025, the Swedish Coast Guard and Maritime Administration will be able to collect insurance information on ships passing through Swedish maritime territory or economic zone, not just those entering ports. Such measures will help Stockholm and its allies obtain critical data on ships in Russia's shadow fleet, which could form the basis for new sanctions lists, the Swedish government noted.
We are seeing more and more problematic events in the Baltic Sea, and this requires us not only to hope for the best, but also to plan for the worst. Ulf Kristersson, Prime Minister of Sweden, from a publication on the Swedish government website.
If current restrictions persist and the West strengthens control over sanctions evasion, Russia could lose its financial cushion by 2026, according to Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service.
Problems are already affecting key sectors. For instance, state-owned Rosatom's projects planned for 2025 remain 80% underfunded. Russian Railways reports a decline in transportation volumes. The mining, metallurgical, and construction sectors show production declines. And Russian corporations are massively suspending dividend payments. All this indicates significant budgetary constraints and a loss of financial maneuverability, even in strategic industries, from a statement by Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service on its website.
While the Kremlin continues to publicly project confidence in economic stability, state propaganda can no longer conceal the real scale of the crisis. Ukrainian intelligence stated, reported by Natalia Husak, Volodymyr Shtenhelov, UATV News.
Oil is crashing, OPEC's pumping more, and Russia's budget spiraling. With Urals crude trading below the West's price cap, even Putin's propaganda machine can't hide the red ink. Analysts say this could be a turning point where global markets do what sanctions alone couldn't. And get this, the Kremlin planned its 2025 budget assuming $70 oil. Right now, it's selling for barely $50. That's not just bad math, it's a tickling time bomb.
Rosneft's net profit in the first quarter of 2025 dropped by 58% compared to the same period last year, according to the company's report. The main reasons include falling oil prices, sanctions against the aggressor state, rising logistics costs, and the Central Bank of Russia's tight monetary policy.
The Bank of Russia makes independent decisions on determining the national currency's exchange rate, primarily considering the realities of the financial system. As a result, the exchange rate is formed without taking into account the economic conditions under which the company operates, which creates additional costs. Net profit increased compared to the previous quarter, but declined year over year due to the higher key interest rate. For example, interest expenses on loans and borrowings increased by 1.8 times year over year. Igor Sechin, chairman and CEO of Rosneft, from the company website.
However, analysts say the global oil market situation is the key factor behind the Kremlin's declining revenues. On May 31st, OPEC Plus countries agreed to increase oil production by 411,000 barrels per day. This sharp hike will raise daily output for OPEC Plus states by 12%, which will undoubtedly push oil prices down as the bloc accounts for 60% of the global oil market.
They offer relief to consumers as the Northern Hemisphere goes into its peak demand season, while also helping central banks grappling with stubborn inflation. Yet the market impact creates financial peril for oil producers around the world, which could be facing a period of prolonged low prices. Oil briefly crashed to a 4-year low under $60 a barrel in April, after the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and its allies first announced that they would bolster output by triple the scheduled amount. From a Bloomberg report,
experts believe the abrupt reversal from a gradual reduction to a sharp increase in production was driven by Donald Trump's promises to lower global fuel prices. To persuade OPEC Plus countries to act, the U.S. president reportedly used tariff pressure. The White House aimed to achieve two goals: reduce domestic energy prices in the U.S. and cut Russia's oil export revenues. According to Bloomberg, Moscow opposed the OPEC Plus decision to boost output since Russian oil prices are already below the cap set by Ukraine's allies.
We're currently looking at Brent crude at $63, American WTI at $59, and Russian Urals at $51.52. That means the legal sale price of Russian oil today is already below the price cap. In other words, Russia basically doesn't even need a shadow tanker fleet anymore because it simply can't sell oil for more than $53 a barrel.
The $60 price cap per barrel introduced by the G7 in December 2022 is no longer effective, according to Kiev. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha has urged the EU to have the cap to $30 per barrel. According to the Financial Times, the upcoming 18th EU sanctions package will propose a new limit of $45. Media also report that the EU plans to expand the list of vessels involved in Russia's illegal shadow fleet.
We must keep in mind that the European Union has significant leverage over Russia. For example, vessels from Russia's so-called shadow fleet pass through EU territorial waters. Blocking that access would likely result in Russia losing 10 to 15% of its global oil sales.
Meanwhile, the head of the Central Bank of the Russian Federation, Elvira Nabiullina, stated that falling resource revenues make it impossible to cut the key interest rate or ease monetary policy. Furthermore, when drafting the 2025 budget, Moscow had planned to sell oil at $70 per barrel. Now, the revenue side of the federal budget will have to be revised downward. Reported by Andriy Dmytrenko, UATV News.
Iran's uranium stockpile is now big enough to build a bomb, maybe even two. And just as that alarming AIEA report hit the headlines, the US sent Tehran a formal proposal to curb its nuclear program. But here's the catch. Iran's not cooperating. It's ramping up enrichment, hiding nuclear sites, and resisting inspections. The American offer isn't a full deal. It's a framework. Halt enrichment, and in return, join a regional nuclear energy consortium. Is a new deal still on the table, or are we sliding towards airstrikes and open confrontation?
The United States transmitted to Iran the first official proposal regarding an agreement aimed at limiting Tehran's potential to create nuclear weapons. A few hours earlier, the International Atomic Energy Agency presented a report on a significant increase in Tehran's stockpiles of enriched uranium. This stockpile is practically sufficient for the production of nuclear weapons, the report states. From February to May 2025, the stockpiles of uranium enriched to 60% in the country increased by 134 kilograms, that is, by almost 50%.
Iran has further increased its stockpile of uranium enriched to near weapons-grade levels. According to a confidential report by the UN's nuclear watchdog, published on Saturday, the report comes at a delicate time as the Trump administration seeks a deal with Tehran to limit its nuclear program, from a publication by Associated Press.
Iran is now the only state without nuclear weapons that produces such materials, according to the IAEA report. Furthermore, the document states that Tehran refused to cooperate and concealed its activities at 3 sites, in Lavisan Shian, Varamin, and Turksabad. The Atomic Energy Agency concluded that these sites may be part of an undeclared nuclear program that Iran began working on before the early 2000s. Tehran still denies the existence of plans to create nuclear weapons and actively resists signing a nuclear deal with the US.
If the issue concerns nuclear weapons, then yes, we also consider this type of weapon unacceptable. Abbas Araghchi, Iranian foreign minister, in a televised address.
According to media reports, the nuclear deal proposals that Washington transmitted to Tehran are not a complete draft agreement. The United States urges Iran to cease uranium enrichment and proposes creating a regional consortium for nuclear energy production involving Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries, as well as the U.S. The White House confirmed the fact of sending the document, but refused to comment on its details.
President Trump has made it clear that Iran can never obtain a nuclear bomb. Special Envoy Witkoff has sent a detailed and acceptable proposal to the Iranian regime, and it's in their best interest to accept it. Caroline Leavitt, White House press secretary, from a publication by the New York Times.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi wrote on the social network X that Iran will respond to the American proposal, quote, in accordance with Tehran's principles and interests. The U.S. and Iran began indirect negotiations on Iran's nuclear program through Oman's mediation in April 2025. If an agreement on Iran's nuclear program is not reached, the United States may resort to force, including airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. U.S. President Trump has repeatedly stated this earlier.
They can't have a nuclear weapon. We want them to be safe. We want them to have a very, very successful nation. Let it be a great nation, but we can't have them. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. And I think we're fairly close to a deal with Iran.
According to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the official nuclear powers are the U.S., Russia, China, France, and the United Kingdom, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. However, among nuclear countries, there is also North Korea, the only state to withdraw from the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons in 2003. Since then, North Korea has conducted several nuclear tests. If the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons collapses, analysts believe that 15 to 25 nuclear powers could emerge in the world, unbound by international obligations and agreements. Reported by Victoria Smirnova, UATV News.
3 fronts, 1 global chessboard. and the clock is ticking. Will the US and EU sanctions actually cripple Russia's war machine? Could crashing oil prices be the real economic game changer? And is Iran on the brink of becoming the world's next nuclear power? What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And stay in focus with UATV.